Okay, everybody, we're going to start. It's been a fantastic series of sessions. We've gone from infrastructure to VCs to long and patient capital. We've looked at corporate venture, and now it gives me huge pleasure to introduce a very old friend and colleague from the earliest days of climate markets, carbon markets, and clean investment. Richard Burritt, Chief Sustainability Officer of Earth Capital. Just to remind you, I'm Anthony Hobley, an Executive Fellow at the World Economic Forum for the Centre for Nature and Climate, and also co-chair of the Carbon Tracker Advisory Board. One of the themes that I've been interested in today as we go through these different pieces of the financial market ecosystem is how do we unlock speed and scale? How do we get that 3 trillion a year that we need to get to net zero and to nature positive flowing? How do we build those 100 green steel plants by 2030, the 7 million zero emissions trucks, the 200 zero emission ships and 6 green corridors, the 20 to 40 CCUS plants, the 300 commercial scale SAF plants, and all of the associated clean power, ammonia, hydrogen, and other infrastructure that we are going to need. Richard, I'm sure you will have some of the answers. So over to you. Looking forward to this very much.
Anthony, thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for turning up to this speech when you could have heard a politician. I mean, obviously, I'm going to talk about avoiding greenwashing. So maybe you've self-selected to be here rather than elsewhere. Or maybe I'm being unfair. Who knows? As Anthony said, I'm a Chief Sustainability Officer at Earth Capital. I'm also a non-exec board director of Triodos Bank, who've quite an ambitious target on net zero and are heavily involved in the financing of that transition. And I'm also a fellow at the Institute of Sustainability Leadership at Cambridge. And it's great to see a couple of students in the audience as well. So quick intro to Earth Capital. We're a relatively early stage private equity investor in growth tech. We're sort of post-seed, pre-Series A, if you understand what that is, a sort of 1 to 5 million initial investment. Really focusing on key themes around energy, food, and water. Now, I was asked to talk about how to understand impact and avoid greenwashing. And I think it's absolutely fundamental because, you know, we know that there's a huge demand for financing a number of transitions, not just a net zero transition, but transitions in other industry sectors. We know a fundamental change is needed, as the British Academy put it in their Future of the Corporation report. Businesses have to find a purpose around profiting from solving, you know, societal and ecological problems rather than profiting while causing them. And that's currently, sadly, the business model. Now, I'm going to make 4 to 5 points. I say 4 to 5 because 2 of them are connected. Point 1 is, I think you have to have a very clear impact narrative as a business. Why is that important? Some people say, no, we don't do impact. Well, I mean, that is, of course, nonsense. Whatever business or investment decisions we make, we have impact. The question is whether we bother to find out and understand what those impacts are and potentially then measure them. All investors are, by definition, impact investors, even though they wouldn't fall into the narrow band of warriors that, you know, label themselves as impact investors. Our impact narrative is quite simply around those 3 sectors. You know, in energy, it's about moving from this fossil fuel and polluting energy to renewable energy generation and energy efficiency. If I look at water, it's about increasing you know, physical and economic water stress by reducing water demand and wastage, making water more resilient, making water supply and systems more resilient in particular. And on a food sector perspective, it's really about moving from this very wasteful, extractive food system we have to responsible and ultimately regenerative agriculture-based supply chains. And it doesn't matter which sector you are involved in net zero is going to be core to all of those. So you need to have a clear impact narrative about what you're doing, and everything you do from an investment perspective has to contribute to those impact narratives without having negative impacts on others. And that I'll come back to that point later. Point two is beware techno-optimism. I hear so many, we're in an innovation conference. I cannot say anything negative about innovation other than the fact that we have an Innovation Zero conference is because historic innovation has caused the problem that we now have to innovate around. Innovation per se is not necessarily a good thing. Innovation with a social and ecological focus could be a wonderful thing and could meaningfully transform the economy and deliver positive social and ecological outcomes. Technology too often concentrates on a symptom without looking at the whole system. So that's my second point. We've got to get away from purely looking at solving problems and symptoms. We've got to understand the system and then make meaningful interventions to cure the problem. The third point, which is sort of a link to that, is we've got to have a clear understanding of impact, both positive and negative. We meet far too many businesses who have a clear understanding of the positive impact of their business, but don't have a holistic understanding of the impacts of their business across the whole value chain. So I think it's, we have our own bespoke tool, the Earth Dividend, which looks at 30 dimensions of sustainability across the value chain, and we use that to try and get that holistic focus. So yes, we want to identify and scale the positive impacts, and we will only invest in businesses if we think they will have a positive impact, but we also want to understand and try to mitigate, where it makes sense from a commercial perspective, any negative impacts in that business. One example is a low-water toilet company that we've invested in. It uses 84% less water per flush than a conventional toilet, which is great. It also, as a result of that, uses 60 to 80% less energy to move the product through the system. It also produces less contaminants because you close the lid when you flush the toilet. It's a partial vacuum. That's the good news. It is, but we've been working with the company on some of its supply chain because it's fundamentally making it from plastics and ceramics like any other toilet. So they're now doing some really innovative stuff, looking at how they can actually reduce the footprint of their overall supply chain to make the product more resilient. So it's point three is understand all the impacts, good and bad. Reflections on greenwashing. Look, there's been a massive loss in trust amongst big business, in particular around sustainability claims. It's a cliche to say that we live in a show me world now, not a trust me world. And that's very true of business. It's also increasingly true of our political friends. It's also leading to a lot of talk around ESG standardization, standardization of reporting. I can really understand why that's occurring. EY came out with a report a year or so ago suggesting that there are 600 attempts to create standardized measuring systems globally. Now, where that's going to end up, I don't know. I'm also not hugely convinced that all of it's helpful either. If you look at the development of taxonomies, etc. We've got to go through a radical transformation and get capital to flow quickly to positive social things and away from brown industries. And we've got to do that by making life easier for those people, not putting potential barriers in the way. So one of the ways in which politicians are trying to deal with the issue of greenwashing is through standardization and taxonomies. There are issues around those. They're politically constructed things. And we have to be aware of that and still move forward positively. Final point, what can companies do in response? I've talked about this need for a clear impact narrative. I think that's often linked to a strong social purpose as a business. If you can genuinely say what your social purpose is as a business and link impact to that, it's important. It goes without well, it doesn't need saying really, but large businesses should be setting science-based targets, and they should also be using their position to advocate for greater climate action across their sectors and more broadly. They should be measuring and reporting. Now, I told you I'm on the board of Triodos Bank in the UK. They've set a 2035 net zero target. That's pretty aggressive. They have joined in a number of partnerships and alliances, one of which started off in the Netherlands. It's called PCAF, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. It's now got hundreds of members globally. It's going to become the global benchmark for accounting for financed emissions. So I think actually that advocacy work outside your organization is really important as well. But to avoid greenwashing, because you can participate in lots of great initiatives, and I have done myself in the past, I think transparency is really important. If you look at a bank like Triodos, they actually make public every loan and every investment they make. It's on their website. You can see who they lend money to, who they invest in. Very few financial institutions would live with that degree of radical transparency. So set a clear impact narrative, understand the system impacts of the company you're investing in or the business you work for. Not just what you're trying to solve, but how does the complex, interconnected outside world fit into that? Make sure you understand positive and negative impacts and work on the material ones. And then it's all about setting clear targets, making them science-based, being transparent, so that you can stand up in the court of public opinion and say, well, look, this is what we've done. If you can find anything wrong with it, tell us. Very few companies are really yet prepared to engage with that degree of radical transparency. And fourthly, and finally, advocacy and partnerships. We're going to actually hit zero or something close to it when we all see that as inevitable. I'm not sure we all see it as inevitable yet, but if we had a mindset shift that said, look, it's going to happen at some stage, let's just work out collectively how we can move as quickly as possible, how we can get capital at scale moving into the sectors that need to decarbonize. The energy sector is relatively straightforward. Other sectors, mobility, built environment, there are technical solutions available too. We've heard about steel earlier, cement, similar work being undertaken. Agriculture is one of the ones that concerns me. That's actually quite a tough sector to decarbonize, but we can make significant progress. So good luck with it, and time for one or two questions, perhaps.
If anybody's got any questions for Richard, please put your hands up and we'd love to take them. Well, Richard, you're going to get away... Oh, no, you're not going to get away scot-free.
Oh, no, right.
Hi, my name is Argem Sanyua. I run an advisory for net zero transition.
Yeah.
One of the things that have come to my attention is most of the private equities are not actually concerned because the obligations are not there in terms of what you're just talking about, this kind of systems thinking, looking at the impact. What do you think can drive private equities towards this? Because they can have a huge impact in this space in making a change.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of private equity firms, and I think there's quite a mixed bag of firms out there. Some actually, I would say, have quite advanced programs around sustainability. Others are nowhere. But if you think about the sort of businesses they are, they're often investing for 5 years, maybe 10 years in an individual company before they exit it. I mean, that's not unusual. It's a really good timescale to work with a business without the glare and noise of being on a listed market. And that's the message I give to private equity companies. You have time, you have a strong management position on the board of those companies often. You can encourage them to do things and help them do things. And I'm pretty convinced, I mean, the way we use our Earth dividend tool at Earth Capital is to try and make those businesses more sustainable so they are more valuable at exit. So I think there's a very clear narrative for why private equity could and should do more. The perception is they're not. I'm not sure that's totally fair, but I know a lot who definitely fall into your category, unfortunately.
Thank you, Richard. Any more questions?
Yep.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Hiro Yamoka, and I'm currently studying a master's in sustainability at Harvard.
Okay.
And my question is, you've talked about, obviously, the innovation side and the investment part and the policy part, but what about the consumer? How are we getting the consumers ready? Because there's a lot of these barriers of accessibility, right? These products coming with a premium.
Yeah.
So how to push that forward as well?
Yeah, it's I mean, when you talk about actors in the market, clearly governments, businesses, and the finance sector are three big groups of actors. The consumers are critical. Some products definitely come at a premium. If you look at electronic vehicles, I mean, that's clearly a market sector where it has come as a premium. I think there are a number of ways companies can respond to that. One is they can actually make a product more sustainable without even telling the consumer. It's called choice editing. You just make your products more sustainable and take things off the shelf that are less sustainable. And you've seen certain retailers do that. So it's not just about convincing consumers of the benefits of moving to a new product range. Sometimes you can make a product more sustainable. Yeah, I mean, nobody would have refused to buy a Harry Potter book if it hadn't been on sustainable paper. When in the days when they sold paper books, one of the last Harry Potter books was printed on FSC paper, the whole book run. The customers wouldn't have cared, but the publisher said, look, it's the right thing to do. Other sectors are more difficult. And I think we really do need much stronger marketing and narratives playing out into the markets to help people change. And it's not just big companies that need to do that. Governments need to do it too. I think you might be able to convince business to do net zero. Whether you can convince the man and woman in the street is another issue. And we've seen, obviously, riots in certain parts of the world where people have tried to bring environmental legislation into play, or in France, change the pension age, which rationally we would think, well, if we're all living longer, it would be sensible to raise the pension age, but it wasn't actually discussed well. And I think the sort of public discourse and debates we have around this issue are really critical. And we've got really bad at that in recent years, partly, I think, as a result of social media. And there's a lot of binary discussions around net zero. Either it's really good or it's really bad. There's not a huge amount of debate about the middle bit, which is how do we do it? And how do we do it well? And what are the challenges? And how do we make it easy for people?
Right, Richard, we've got one last question. Yeah. This gentleman had his hand up first. I'm going to pass it to him.
Yeah.
But it has to be a very quick answer.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Toby Stanway,
Yep.
ex-oil industry man, now academically interested in carbon capture and storage.
Yeah.
So, quick question. When it comes to subsurface geological storage, capture and storage, including direct air capture and storage, is that something you would envision investing in? If so, yes. Why? And if not, why not?
So it's not something that Earth Capital would do, that sort of industrial scale product. But I personally think carbon capture and storage facilities are critical, and they have to be invested in. How we get them over the hurdle is difficult. It probably involves some public-private investment on that, and obviously a much higher carbon price than we currently enjoy today. Anthony, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, can we give Richard a round of applause? That was fantastic.